This Could Be a Cult is critical commentary, cultural criticism, opinion, and satire. The subject of this episode is a structure, the simplification and commercialization of attachment research as it travels through popular books, quizzes, short-form video, and the unregulated coaching industry. Not any specific creator, coach, program, app, or company. References to researchers like Bowlby, Ainsworth, Main, Hazan, Shaver, and others are to their published historical work. Living creators and coaches in this attachment content space are not named or singled out, and any resemblance to a specific person is incidental. Descriptions of how the popular psychology and coaching market operates, and any figures or characterizations are offered as general illustration in the service of an argument, not as statements of fact about any particular practitioner, program, or company. Nothing here is medical or psychological advice. Nothing here is a clinical assessment or a diagnosis of any individual, including you, your partner, or your ex. Self-report attachment quizzes are not diagnostic instruments, and nothing in this episode is a substitute for care from a qualified licensed professional. This episode discusses relationship distress, childhood caregiving, and patterns that can be painful to look at directly. If any of this lands close to your life, that feeling is valid, and you don't have to sit with it alone. Support resources are linked in the show notes. You have a type. Not a physical type, but a psychological one. And you know this now because you took a quiz. And that quiz told you that you're anxiously attached. And anxiously attached means that you crave closeness and fear abandonment, that you tend to read ambiguity as rejection, and that you respond to relationship stress by seeking more connection at the exact same moment that the other person wants space. And when you read this, for the first time in years, you feel completely understood. You feel cataloged, and you feel explained. Like someone had finally handed you the manual that should have come with you. And then you did what everybody else does next. You diagnosed every single person that you have ever dated. The avoidant ex who needed space, the fearful avoidant ex who was, in technical terms, complicated, the secure one that you probably self-sabotaged, which you see that clearly now with this new instrument that you've found. But within an afternoon, you had a complete framework for every relationship of your entire life, and it was coherent and internally consistent, and it explained absolutely everything. And that produced a very specific feeling for you. Part relief, part clarity. But underneath both of those, there is something that's much less comfortable to name. And that's the feeling of having joined something, of being sorted into a house, or of belonging to a category that comes with a community, a vocabulary, and a set of people who are all just like you. So hold on to that feeling, you all, because we're about to take it apart. And not because it's stupid. It isn't. And the thing underneath it is very real. Because that feeling is the precise point where a body of careful developmental research gets converted into something that can be sold repeatedly back to you for years. So welcome to the deep dive. I'm April Rain, and today we're going into attachment theory. The real version, the flattened version, the weaponized version, and the coaching funnel that quietly turns your relationship patterns into a recurring revenue stream. This is the analytical companion to this week's main episode on the wound economy. So if you haven't heard that one, this one will probably sit better once you do. So let's establish the real thing first, and in some detail, because you can't see what was done to it if you don't know what it was. Attachment theory was developed by John Bowlby across the 1950s and 60s, and it extended empirically by Mary Ainsworth in the 70s. Her strain situation protocol, which is a structured laboratory observation of how small children respond to a caregiver leaving and returning, is the bedrock of the whole field. And then it was developed further by researchers including Mary Main, who identified the disorganized pattern, and Cindy Hazan and Phillip Shaver, who in the 1980s extended the framework into adult romantic relationships. That's decades of work by a lot of hands, and it was built on direct observation and longitudinal data. And the core finding is very real and well supported. The pattern of connection and comfort seeking that we develop in our earliest relationships with caregivers shape the strategies that we use as adults to manage closeness and distance. This is not pseudoscience. It is mainstream developmental psychology with a substantial empirical base. And I want to be unambiguous about that because the rest of this episode is very critical, and I refuse to let the criticism get heard as attachment theory is fake. It is not fake. It is one of the most robust things that psychology has produced. But what was done to it on the way to your feed is the problem, not the thing itself. Now, there are 4 properties of the real research, because each and every one of them is going to get quietly stripped out later, and I want to name them now so you'll actually catch the theft when it happens. So are you ready? Number 1, the categories are dimensional, not categorical. The research describes people as existing alongside continuous dimensions. Roughly, how much anxiety you carry about a relationship and how much you avoid depending on it. Secure, anxious, and avoidant are all regions on a map of a box that you live inside of. Most people are a blend, sitting somewhere in the middle of the entire field and not a pure specimen in one corner. Number 2, the patterns are context dependent. The same person can show up differently in different relationships with different partners at different stages of life. Attachment is something that happens between people in a specific bond, not a fixed trait that you can carry around like a blood type that's identical in every room that you enter. And number 3, the patterns are measured with structured instruments, not vibes. Serious attachment research uses tools like the Adult Attachment Interview, which is a lengthy, trained rather than scored protocol that analyzes not just what you say about your childhood, but how coherently you say it. It is slow, it is expensive, and it is rigorous. It is the opposite of a thing that you tap through between videos. Number 4, and this is the most important one. This is the one whose removal does the most damage. Attachment patterns are changeable. The research is explicitly structurally optimistic about this. Through what the literature calls earned security, corrective relational experiences over time, including good therapy and including stable, reliable relationships, a person who starts insecure can become secure. Your pattern is a starting point. It is not the whole sentence. And the whole field is at its heart a theory of how people can change. So, dimensional, context dependent, rigorously measured, and changeable. Hold on to those 4. What happened to this research on its way to short form video is a story about how good science gets simplified, then weaponized, and then monetized. In that order. And at every stage, it's one of those 4 properties getting quietly left behind. The simplification happened in stages, and I want to walk them in order, because the genius of the thing is that no single step looks like a crime. The research became a popular book, and that book became a quiz, and that quiz became a short-form video format, and the format became a personality type, and the type became a community, and the community became a coaching program. There it is, all 6 steps. And each one small, each one reasonable on its own. And at every step, something quietly got dropped on the floor. And it was never the fun part that got dropped. It was always one of the 4 load-bearing properties from the last segment. At the book stage, the dimensions go. Books need types. types are legible, repeatable, and they let a reader say, "I am anxious," at a dinner party, which a continuous two-axis model does not. A continuum cannot be a chapter title. So the smooth gradient of the resource gets chopped into 4 tidy named boxes. And the boxes, which were always meant as rough regions, start hardening into identities. And this isn't even malicious. It's just what happens when you translate a research construct into something a general reader can hold. But the cost is very real. And you've now traded a map of a landscape for a set of 4 labeled buckets, and the buckets are much easier to sell. At the quiz stage, the measurement rigor goes. The structured, trainer-rated instruments get replaced by a self-report quiz, a set of statements that you rate about your own self. And those self-report quizzes have, at very best, moderate reliability. Your quote-unquote anxious score may reflect your underlying pattern, or it may reflect your mood that the day you took it, or it may reflect the relationship that you're currently bruised by, or your very human tendency to agree with flattering statements about yourself. These quizzes were never built to replace clinical instruments, and most were built quite openly to drive engagement, to get a shareable result that you've screenshotted and sent to 3 of your friends, which is a marketing function wearing a diagnostic costume. The result feels like a measurement, though, and it is closer to a horoscope with footnotes. At the short form video stage, the changeability goes. And this is the load-bearing theft, the one that turns a theory of growth into a theory of doom. Research attachment theory is optimistic. Patterns can shift. Feed attachment theory treats the types as fixed and even permanent identities. You are anxious. He is avoidant. This is simply who you both are, now and forever. And notice what that does to the meaning of the whole thing. The research says, here's a pattern that you can work with. But the feed says, here's a compatibility problem that explains why you keep failing and will keep failing because this is your nature and this is his nature. The type stops being a starting line and becomes a fate. Astrology, basically, but with citations, which makes it far more persuasive because it feels like science and it grants permission to stop trying. And at the coaching stage, the clinical context goes, the actual active ingredient. In real attachment work, the change comes from being inside a safe, consistent, boundaried relationship over time. With a clinician, the therapeutic relationship itself is a corrective experience. The thing that slowly rewrites the pattern, that's the mechanism. That does the work. A group coaching container can hand you a great deal of information about your pattern. But information about a corrective relational experience is not a corrective relational experience. And it's not that any more than a map of the gym builds you muscles. The one ingredient that the research says is non-negotiable is the one ingredient a downloadable program structurally cannot contain. You can't ship a relationship as a PDF, people. So I want you to stack the 4 thefts and look at what's left. You started with a multidimensional, context-dependent, rigorously measured, changeable model of how humans grow in relationships. And you ended up with a fixed, self-diagnosed, 4-box personality type that gets sold back to you as a permanent identity and a recurring purchase. They are the same words the whole way down, and almost nothing of the actual science that's still inside those words. Now is the interpersonal layer. How this vocabulary, once absorbed, gets used as an instrument of control inside an actual relationship. And it runs both directions, which is what makes it so hard to see while you're inside it, by the way. Direction 1, diagnosing the partner. You've determined that your partner is avoidant, and the diagnosis actually explains so much. Their need for space, their withdrawal under pressure, their difficulty staying present in an emotionally intimate moment? The explanation is genuinely clarifying, and sometimes it's actually accurate. But watch what that diagnosis also quietly does. It converts their behavior from a choice into a symptom. They're not pulling away because they've decided to not show up for you. They're pulling away because of the childhood wounds that make closeness feel dangerous. And sometimes that reframe is true and merciful and exactly right. And sometimes it is the precise mechanism by which a person talks themselves into tolerating treatment that should not be tolerated. Because the behavior has been made medical adjacent, and you don't hold someone accountable for a symptom. Well, guess what you just did? You've now diagnosed your way out of your own standards. So here is direction 2, and that's using your own diagnosis as a shield. I know I'm being anxious right now. That's my attachment style activating. And that sentence is so true. But it can also be, depending on how it's deployed, a way of describing your behavior while declining responsibility for its impact. Both things are real at once. Your attachment pattern is real, and the effect of your behavior on the person across from you is also real. The vocabulary lets you foreground the first and disappear to the second. To announce the weather system as though announcing it were the same as not raining on someone. Naming that you're doing a thing is not the same as doing it. It just sounds to everyone, including you, a great deal more evolved than, oops, I did it again. And here's the Steelman, because the diagnosing impulse comes from somewhere real, and I won't pretend otherwise. Understanding genuinely does help. Knowing that a partner's withdrawal is fear rather than contempt can generate real patience, real compassion, and a real softening that lets two people get through a hard moment instead of detonating it. The framework, when it is used well, builds empathy. And I'm not arguing for less understanding. I'm drawing the exact line where understanding curdles into something else. Understanding becomes weaponized the moment that it stops being used to change how you engage, and it starts being used to explain why nothing has changed. Compassion that produces patience is the theory working. Compassion that produces indefinite tolerance of harm is the theory being used as anesthetic. And the end state in a relationship where both people have absorbed a lot of content is almost eerie to watch, y'all. Two people narrating each other's activations and their own real fluency and real sophistication. I think you're flooded. I notice I'm getting anxious protest. That's your deactivating strategy. While the underlying dynamic does not move a single inch. Because the describing has now fully replaced the changing. And they have not become expert communicators on a game neither of them is actually playing differently. They are, both of them, extraordinarily articulate about being stuck. And the articulateness feels like progress, which is exactly why they can stay stuck for years. Okay, so let's end where the research actually points, which is somewhere very different from where those funnel points point. It is a map, not a verdict. Knowing your attachment pattern tells you the direction that you tend to drift under stress. That is your default move when a relationship gets frightening. It is also genuinely useful. A person who knows that they chase when scared or vanish when scared has a real head start on catching themselves mid-move. But the map is not to tell you where you have to go. It does not tell you who you're compatible with. It does not explain every relationship that you've ever had, and the fact that it feels like it does should be a warning sign, not a credential. Anything that explains everything is doing astrology's job and not science's. It is one lens among several that trained clinicians use, and as they hold it in their hands, they hold it loosely, provisionally, and as a hypothesis. The feed, however, sells it to you as destiny. So hold it in the way that the researchers do. Hold it lightly. The corrective experience is the therapy, or more precisely, the relationship. The framework without the experience is just information, and information is a starting point, not a treatment. The people who make the most significant gains in attachment security do it inside safe, consistent, boundaried relationships over time. Therapeutic ones, as well as ordinary ones, with friends and partners who reliably show up time and time again. It is not done in a 6-week program, and it is not done by watching over 40 videos about avoidant exes. In actual sustained connection with actual people who actually keep showing up when it would be easier not to. That is the active ingredient. It has always been the active ingredient, and it cannot be purchased as a module because it isn't a module. It's a practice, and it's done with another human, and it's done slowly. And here is the central irony of the entire spiral. This is the thing that makes it genuinely tragic rather than silly. The consumption of the content frequently replaces the very thing that the content is ostensibly about. You can spend so many hours learning to have a secure relationship that you have no actual hours left to actually be in one. And the structure is actually built to keep you there. The algorithm, having learned that you respond to attachment content, just feeds you more attachment content. And the coaching program that sold you that one tier, guess what? They have another. And the secure relationship, the one where you'd actually do the things instead of just studying about them, well, that keeps not happening. And it's partly because studying is easier and there's no risk of rejection, and you can't get dumped by a video. So that video wins, night after night, against the frightening real thing that it claims to be preparing you for. And the preparation becomes a very sophisticated way of never arriving. So here's the off-ramp, and it's deliberately unglamorous because the real thing always is. So put down that quiz. Call an actual therapist if you can possibly access one. And yes, I know that's a real if, and the inaccessibility of good care is the scandal underneath this entire week. But if you can't, find the one person that you can trust and practice being honest with them. Don't be just honest about your attachment style. You don't need to narrate your activations into a new vocabulary. Just be honest, plainly, about something that scares you with someone who keeps showing up for you. That is the corrective experience stripped right down to its frame. And it's boring. It's free though. I joke, but it does carry real risk, which is exactly why it works and exactly why nothing in the funnel can replicate it. And it does more in one genuinely honest afternoon than that entire content library will do for you in a year. And now I bring you to the part of the show where we talk about the signs that you're in this one. So if you're ready, sit back and relax, and I'm going to show you a mirror of yourself. You know your attachment style and your ex's attachment style. You can explain the dynamic between them in very confident detail. And that pattern has not changed across any of the relationships that followed. You've described someone's behavior as their attachment style activating, when in plain language, you should have said that their behavior was hurting you. You've used your own style the exact same way. You've announced the activation as though announcing it settled the matter. You've paid for a course about relationships in the last year, and you have not, in that same year, been to therapy. You felt genuinely, tearfully seen by a single attachment theory video, and then you watched it 17 more times, and then you watched 17 more other videos. And that feeling of being seen slowly became the activity itself. And here's the last one. You've diagnosed someone you've never met, a friend's partner, a stranger in a story, from a 2-sentence description with total confidence. You're not in trouble. The framework is genuinely fun to use. And that's part of how it keeps you. Attachment theory is a real thing, built by careful people over decades. And it can genuinely help you understand yourself and the people you love. The version being handed to you in quiz form by someone with a coaching certification, a content calendar, and a very clean Canva aesthetic is a simplified, monetized, accountability-stripped copy of the real thing, wearing its vocabulary like a borrowed lab coat. And the whole skill this show is trying to give you is the ability to tell those two apart when they're using identical words. So know the difference between the map and the territory. The map is the content, the quiz, the videos, the 4 tidy boxes, and the community of people who share your box. The territory is your actual relationships with your actual people, conducted in real time, at real risk. The map is endlessly available, infinitely scrollable, and free of the possibility of getting hurt. But the territory is where every single thing that the map describes either happens or doesn't. The work was always in the territory. It was never in the DMs of your Attachment Styles online community. So put the phone down and go be slightly too honest with that one person who has earned it. That's the whole assignment. It always has been. I'm April Rain, and this could be a cult. You already know the rules.